Next up on our agenda is policy 4302R. So let's see if we can get there. Oops, I'm in the wrong one. Okay. So, this policy was going to be listed under the policy consensus, but under advisement from many of you that we wanted to talk about this separately. So I pulled it out. We have 20 minutes to discuss that. So all of the items in here, this came from policy committee, and I can look up the vote, but if I remember correctly, it was 2-0, because Mr. Boyer wasn't there. Mr. Wildeboer and I were. So there are two different things, just like Ms. Varnum had explained to us last time, that there are two different colors in the policy. And the red comes from NCSBA, and the blue comes from New Hanover County Schools. Well, it's actually kind of purple. So I don't know how to proceed here. Ms. Barnum doesn't really have a presentation. Is there a motion to approve this policy as amended?
So moved.
Can I request, Madam Chair, that Ms. Varnum just explain again why we were talking about seclusion versus seclusion, or seclusion rooms versus seclusion?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you'll notice in the section marked, if we can scroll up a little bit, the whole section on seclusion. Overall, as we discussed in our last meeting, seclusion means the confinement of a student alone in an enclosed space from which they're physically prevented from leaving by locking, hardware, or other means. Could also be direction not to leave, or incapable of leaving. So due to physical or intellectual capacity. So overall, there are 5 circumstances that apply to this use of seclusion where it is considered to be reasonable use of force under general statute. So 1, as reasonably needed to respond to, a weapon, control of a weapon or dangerous object. The next, I suppose, since there are letters, I'll use letters
3A.
instead of numbers.
Yeah,
Yes.
3A.
A. B, in order to prevent or break up a fight, as an example I gave. C, as reasonably needed for self-defense. And then D, when behavior poses a threat of imminent physical harm. Those A through D represent emergency situations. Mm-hmm. And as we've discussed before, staff need to have an opportunity to respond to emergency situations. And as has been shared, that is also a time you call for law enforcement to support. It doesn't mean law enforcement is going to be right there at the moment, but they will be on their way. Section E is where we really see the change beyond this school year. So that one is when used as specified in an IEP, a 504 plan, or a behavior and intervention plan, and all of these components are in place. What we are basically altering in this regulation is section E here, 3E, because in the purplish color down at the bottom, well, let me highlight one thing before we get to that. So it does say, except as set forth above, the use of seclusion is not considered to be reasonable force, and its use is prohibited. So this outlines the only options to use it. In addition, seclusion will not be considered a reasonable use of force when used solely as a disciplinary consequence. That cannot be underscored enough. Seclusion is not to be a disciplinary consequence. So in this section, for the remainder of this school year, the use of seclusion rooms will only be used in those most rare circumstances to de-escalate the physical injury of others when all other intervention has failed, in accordance with determination from the team for that child, whether it's an IEP team, a 504 team, a team of MTSS staff that are supporting a behavior intervention plan, and with parent guardian consent. But then that next piece, as of the 23-24 school year, rooms designed specifically for seclusion will no longer be operational. That means that all of Section E, because one of the requirements is a room has to be specified, all of Section E is non-existent beyond this school year. So seclusion would only be used in the emergency situations listed in A through D. That would be those situations you would then call on law enforcement to come and support. That substantially and substantively reduces the seclusions vastly, and not entirely every situation, but the vast majority of seclusions that have occurred. Because we will not be, for example, under E3, the confining space has been approved for such use by the school system. We will not be approving confining space. Therefore, all of E is no longer operational.
Thank you, Ms.
Mr. McManus, did you have a question? No. Okay. Ms. Justice?
So what you're saying is after this school year, E and below will not exist?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Ms. Walker?
I guess my question is, because we did talk earlier about practice, and I feel like in situations when where it's an emergency, I mean, is that technically a seclusion, or is that covered under another policy that we already have in place?
That would be the easiest place to land, but unfortunately, the technical definition for seclusion includes use in any of those situations. It does. And so anytime by the basic definition of seclusion, anytime a student is placed in a space, whether it's a classroom, the principal's office, you may not leave. You are alone in there and you may not leave. That meets the definition. So that's what cannot be taken away in order to maintain a safe and orderly environment. However, all of Section E can, with the use of other supports, planned supports, predictable supports. When working with a student that has any type of significant needs, behavior, mental health, any of those things, there's a plan in place, and using alternative methods for de-escalation and support, crisis support, that doesn't meet the same as A through D with an emergency situation that could not have been predicted.
So, yeah, so just to follow up, I apologize. So like, I know, once these things get changed, and I know there's questions about whether or not, where would the designated rooms, if we don't have them anymore, would they anywhere become a seclusion place? But also, if we have staff that is getting trained, and I know we haven't had an update on that in a while. I know like a couple of meetings ago, we talked about the training and how you had funding, but then it kind of fell through. I guess if we start changing these policies, I want to make sure staff feels supported, and therefore the students are supported, because I know that's a very important component of what we're doing here. So I guess my question would be, what, based on the past and maybe perceived abuse of the seclusion policy, we don't want that to happen anymore. And I guess maybe it's like something very new for the district to be doing now. I just want to make sure it's done correctly. How do we ensure, like, will the district going to give us ideas of when the training is going to happen? If you need funding, can we help you get funding? I don't know. I don't want to leave staff without any means.
So we have, in the last week or so, gotten approval for using some of our ESSER carryover dollars in a different way, some dollars that I had kind of carved out that were not needed to fully carry out some of the programs that we had in place for last year, and using some money from after-school programs and that kind of thing to move forward with some of our training. Our trauma-sensitive schools training is already on the books and scheduled. While it does take staff out of the classroom some, it provides a valuable resource for how they how they were able to support in the classroom on a daily basis. So that is already, we've already gotten that funded, and as of last week, we received approval on the ESSER carryover. So we're moving forward with those. Where as of yesterday, we had contact within the past week with the staff in Lives in the Balance to reset up that calendar date. But once we have the contract, we have to get that moving and then set the dates up. So that's now moving again. But by the end of this school year, this is a reasonable expectation that the only use of seclusion would be for emergency situations that could not have been predicted, but not as a regular de-escalation strategy for our students.
Not necessarily as an IEP
Right,
situation either. Okay.
right.
Not an I.
It would not be an option to use it.
Okay.
Mr. Boyer?
Yeah, just quickly, I always tell my students access to information is not the same as education.
What was that?
Could you speak
I
up? I'm
always tell
sorry.
my students access to information is not the same as education. And somebody came up here tonight and they
What?
said something that I actually wrote down. They said, you have experts and scientists who could make it better. 2 years ago, the community diagnosed a problem. The board asked for a solution. And our experts have worked for 2 years to provide us with one that is doable, sustainable, and I just really appreciate it. And I know, we hear a lot about practices in our school system, and I just want you guys to know how much I appreciate the real work that is done, and just how valued it is, because every day our staff is in it to make the lives of our students better. And this is what this policy, I believe, does. And I know how much it took. So I just want to say thank you to our entire staff and to our experts. Thank you.
Ms. Justice?
I'd like to thank the parents that have been bringing it here for 2 years. It hasn't been 3 years. They're the ones that are the emphasis for this. The staff is wonderful. They've done their jobs, but the district has been pushed into doing it, okay? So let's recognize what this is about. This is a change in a culture and an appreciation for the development of kids and what really does work and doesn't harm them. And I'm so glad we're not going to be doing this anymore. I do see the need for it through E. I have worked in schools. You've got these emergency situations, you got to be realistic. But otherwise, I am so glad to hear that we're coming into the 21st century and doing away with this horrible practice that, in my opinion, was torture for children. Sorry about that. I know it's a cultural thing.
So to Ms. Walker's point too, I just wanted to say that I don't know about any of you, but I have been reached out to by teachers who are concerned if we take away their only option of managing behavior that has gone awry, a student who's in crisis, then it will be very tough. So I am in support of this at the way it's written, so that we have not only are protecting our students, but we also are protecting our staff, because we have had some teachers who've had some pretty significant injuries and some pretty significant incidents, around that. So I just wanted to do that one speak up, that I'm sure you've heard, because, we all have heard a thing or two. So, Ms. Adams?
I would like to, again, echo, I know this has taken a lot of work and a lot of effort to get here, and thank you for all of that. Appreciate the advocacy for those that have come for all these years. I will say this, there were multiple educators that were considering coming to call to the audience this evening to share their perspective. Because of the advocates in the room, they felt that they were concerned about retribution, and I'm being honest with you about that. They were worried about retaliation and about sharing their story. So I think it's very important that we listen to the people that are in the classrooms that are dealing with these emergency situations. Students do come first, I agree. But we have staff members that are also being traumatized by circumstances that are occurring in the classroom. We cannot ignore that. I think this is a good balance. I think that we are moving away from a practice that we all agree is not correct, it's not right. However, there are extreme circumstances, and the safety of our students, the safety of our staff, that all matters. And we can't ignore the people that are the ones implementing these policies. They need to have an option. I appreciate the work that went into this. I think that being able to have an option for extreme circumstances still as a possibility, with the definition of seclusion being what it is, I will support the update as it is, and I appreciate the work that went into it. And I thank our educators that are out there learning de-escalation techniques, doing what they can to provide the best services to our children. But we cannot forget them in this conversation. I have spoken with someone that cried to me and wanted to be here to share their perspective and the trauma that they have been through, and didn't feel comfortable coming into this room to call to the audience. And that is a problem.
Ms. Walker? Ms. Walker?
So I would like to say that it's on us how we support our staff. You know, I understand, because I think what makes me very nervous is because in the end, it's what affects the children. And I think supporting staff is the most important thing that we have to do, and that is on us to do that. And I've talked to a few EC teachers, and I will talk to more, as many as I can, for them to let us know what we have to do to support them. I don't want them to feel that way, but they also, I'm sure most of them don't want to be secluding kids. I just don't think they do. And I think if they had a better means and better support, they wouldn't have to. And that includes having assistants in the rooms with them. It includes the training. It includes everything this district can do to help them. So I don't want to vilify anybody. I think I'm glad we're making some changes, and we can build on this. And I just feel like we have to do our jobs as a school board.
Ms. Justice?
Yes, nobody needs to be vilified on either. There is no side. We're all on the side of kids. And I want to assure those staff that I've worked in at least 4 or 5 other districts. I've never seen the use of these seclusion rooms in any of them. And that's why I made the statement I made, because I know it does not need to be dependent on, the culture in the school depended on it in the wrong way. They didn't provide them the training. That's why I'm so glad that it has happened the last 2 years, and the whole concept was brought forth by the parents who cared. So it's obviously the staff and the parents and the central office who are working together. So nobody needs to be vilified. And I'm sorry if somebody felt like they were threatened, because I know people on the staff, and I know these wonderful parents that care, and nobody should be feeling like anybody's threatening anybody. But it does work. I've seen it work in other districts that have never needed it, and I'm sorry that they came to the point where they thought that that was something they needed in order to work with children. And I'm sure that in the long run, they're going to find this is so beneficial. So I'm really glad that this is happening.
Mr. McManus?
I'm just going to compliment Barnum, how she can put up with all my personalities in the audience and come up with something that seems to work every single time. Kudos to you. I mean, everybody works hard, but somehow you got to dump on me, light in your lap, and you came through. I really appreciate it.
So is there a motion to accept policy 4302R as amended?
So moved.
Okay, so we got Ms. Walker, Ms. Justice,
Second.
and then Mr. Boyer. Do we need to do a roll call? Okay. Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that passes as amended. Thank you for the work on that team.